Most sermons and Bible studies deal with living things, whether God, the Father, the Son, or the Holy Spirit, or even man. But today's study is different. It involves living beings, but the main character of this is the incredible story of the Ark of the Covenant. Hello, I'm Chaplain R.T. Byram. The Ark involves a unique object designed by God, but it was built by man, and it was unlike anything before or since its appearance. The saga begins more than 3,000 years ago when God called Moses to join him on Mount Sinai to receive detailed instructions for building the tabernacle and its furnishings and the vessels, the dimensions, the materials for construction, the draperies, and inside, the veil for the Holy of Holies, the lampstand, the table, the showbread shelves, the basins, trumpets, and even the robes for the priests. And then God even dictated plans for the Ark of the Covenant. And there were no computers, obviously, or AutoCAD software at the time, but I can imagine that there were rough sketches made to give to those in charge of constructing this one-of-a-kind subject, this object. So here are the exact words that God told to Moses. This is Exodus 25, verses 10 to 15. Have them make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. A cubit is generally considered to be between 18 and 20 inches, depending on the person's distance between the elbow and the fingertip. So if we take the larger figure of 20, the ark was about 4 feet, maybe 2 inches long. The acacia wood is a fairly durable choice for furniture, and it can take on a beautiful shine. However, in the case of the ark, this wood is completely covered. Look at Exodus 25, verses 11 to 15. Overlay it with pure gold, both inside and out, and make a gold molding all around it. Cast 4 gold rings for it and fasten them to its 4 feet with 2 rings on one side and 2 rings on the other. Then make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Insert the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark to carry it. The poles are to remain in the rings of this ark. They are not to be removed. You see, God did not intend for any human being to ever touch the actual ark after it was completed and the contents it was designed for were placed inside. And so the only way it could be moved was with the poles that, notice, were to remain in place. And to this point, the ark was probably looking like an expensive storage chest that looked something like this. Impressive, but not yet complete. God intended this to be an awesome example of His glory and majesty. He continued by describing 2 fantastic images that would grade the cover. Exodus 25, verses 17 to 20. Make an atonement cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide. And make 2 cherubim out of hammered gold at the ends of the cover. Make 1 cherub on one end and a 2nd cherub on the other, and make them of one piece with the cover at the 2 ends. The cherubim are to have their wings spread upward, overshadowing the cover with them. And the cherubim are to face each other, looking toward the cover. Now the cherubim were to be a permanent part of the cover, you noticed, rather than separate figures attached by nails. And they were not to be removed after all the contents had been put inside, except by God's command. Look at Exodus 25. This is verses 21 to 22. Place the cover on top of the ark and put in the ark the tablets of the covenant law that I will give you. And there, above the cover, between the 2 cherubim that are over the ark of the covenant law, I will meet with you and give you all my commands for the Israelites. Now here's a mystery. The command to build the Ark of the Covenant is recorded in Exodus 25. But it was back in Exodus 16:32-34 that we find this. This is what the Lord has commanded. Take an omer of manna and keep it for the generations to come, so they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the desert when I brought you out of Egypt. Then in Exodus 32-34 continued, Moses said to Aaron, take the jar and put an omer of manna in it. Then place it before the Lord to be kept for generations to come. As the Lord commanded Moses, Aaron put the manna in front of the testimony that it might be kept. The testimony refers to the 10 Commandments. So the jar, also made of gold, would have to be placed in the ark ahead of the stone tablets. Now we jump ahead to Numbers 17:10, and we see what that third and last item was sealed into the ark. The Lord spoke to Moses, put back Aaron's staff in front of the testimony to be kept as a sign to the rebellious. This will put an end to their grumbling against me so that they will not die. Now wait a minute. The 10 Commandments was a permanent reminder to the Jews of God's law and the need to obey it. Then the jar of manna was a supernatural miracle when God fed his people for 40 years in the wilderness. And it was included in the ark, lest the people forget the mercy and the grace that brought them out of Egypt. But what was this staff of Aaron doing in the sacred ark of the covenant? And how would that end the grumbling of God's people? Well, that answer lies back a few verses in Numbers 17:1-3. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and get from them a rod from each father's house, all their leaders according to their father's house, 12 rods, and write each man's name on his rod. And you shall write Aaron's name on the rod of Levi, for there shall be one rod for the head of each father's house. Then you shall place them in the tabernacle of the meeting before the testimony where I meet with you. And it shall be that the rod of the man whom I choose will blossom. Thus I will rid myself of the complaints of the children of Israel, which they will make against you. It was Aaron's rod that budded, indicating that men from the tribe of Levi would become the priests of the chosen people. The buds not only appeared on the rod overnight, but even more than that, they produced blossoms and fully ripened almonds. Now that's a sign that no one could grumble about. And still it takes a trip completely through the Old Testament into the New before we find this summary of all of the ark's contents. This is Hebrews 9:14. This ark contained the gold jar of manna, Aaron's staff that had budded, and the stone tablets of the covenant. Well, then the ark was to be placed in the Holy of Holies, to be seen only by the high priest at the times he was prescribed to enter and perform his duties. There was a gorgeous woven curtain or a veil that was also minutely described, and that was used to separate the two main areas of the tabernacle. Exodus 26:33 describes this. Hang the curtain from the clasps and place the Ark of the Covenant law behind the curtain. The curtain will separate the holy place from the most holy place. Well, after the ark was placed in the holy place, whether it was in the desert tent or later on in the permanent temple, quote unquote, in Jerusalem, there were further instructions from God as written in Exodus 27 verse 21. In the tent of the meeting, outside the curtain that shields the Ark of the Covenant law, Aaron and his sons are to keep the lamps burning before the Lord from evening till morning. This is to be a lasting ordinance among the Israelites for all the generations to come. And so as the Israelites were camped in the desert, God then gave instructions to Moses to move the people to the promised land. And the camp was packed up along with the tabernacle tent, and the journey began. Numbers 10, verse 33. And so they set out from the mountain of the Lord, and they traveled for 3 days. The ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them during those 3 days to find them a place to rest. Now God commanded that the ark was always to go before the people, and that when they were faced with enemies, God would give them victory. Still, the people grew impatient, and they grumbled about leaving Egypt, where they had real food, not just manna. The men who had stirred up the people to rebellion were struck down with a plague from the Lord, and they died. The Israelites bitterly mourned their plight, and many decided they were going to head for the highest point in the hill country away from the desert. Moses warned them they were not to move without a command from God and not without the presence of the ark. So did they listen? Verse 44. Nevertheless, in their presumption, they went up toward the highest point of the hill country, though neither Moses nor the ark of the Lord's covenant moved from the camp. Then the Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in that hill country came down and attacked them and beat them down all the way to Hormoth. Later, when the ark was with Joshua, and you remember the walls of Jericho fell, and the city was given into the hands of the Jews, Joshua was then told by God to choose warriors and conquer the city of Ai. And that battle is recorded in Joshua 8, and it was another victory under God's hand. Again, the ark was with them. After the battle, Joshua built an altar to the God of Israel in Mount Ebal, the ruins of which remain today. All the Israelites, with their elders, officials, and judges, were standing on both sides of the ark of the covenant of the Lord, facing the Levitical priests who carried it. Both the foreigners living among them and the native born were there. Half the people stood in front of Mount Gizrim, and the other half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had formerly commanded when he gave instructions to bless the people of Israel. Then, when the Israelites reached the Jordan River, it was at flood stage. Now, those of us who have had the privilege of visiting the Holy Land saw something that looked more like a creek or a stream at the baptismal site. The widest stretch of the Jordan River there is about 98 feet, and the depth ranges between 3 and 10 feet. But it was not always that narrow, and it was shallow. When Joshua led the Israelites toward Canaan, the multitude arrived at a much different river. Joshua 3:5-17. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during the harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing, and it piled up in a heap at a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowed down to the Sea of the Arabus, that is, the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. And so the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. I want you to think of that. There were over 1 million people, and yet while the priests stood in the middle of the Jordan River on dry ground, all of these people passed across the Jordan. Sounds like the Red Sea, doesn't it? When the Israelites had ignored all the commands, however, the story had a different ending. We look in 1 Samuel and we find a series of events that showed that God's plans for the ark would bring blessing or cursing to those who used or abused its purpose. We'll begin in 1 Samuel 4. This is verses 1 and 2. Now the Israelites went out to fight against the Philistines. The Israelites camped at Ebenezer and the Philistines at Aphek. The Philistines deployed their forces to meet Israel. And as the battle spread, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 of them on the battlefield. I want you to imagine the shock. Battle after battle had gone to the Israelites, and now at a cost of 4,000 lives, they're defeated by the Philistines. Well, the survivors escaped back to camp to lick their wounds and meet with the leaders. 1 Samuel 4, verse 3. When the soldiers returned to camp, the elders of Israel asked, "Why did the Lord bring defeat on us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the Lord's covenant from Shiloh so that he may go with us and save us from the hand of our enemies." Now remember the command not to move without a command from God and the presence of the ark. And so the people sent men to Shiloh to bring back the ark, and when it came into the camp, all Israel raised such a shout that the ground shook. And then hearing the uproar, the Philistines asked, "What's all this shouting in the Hebrew camp?" They learned that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp, and the Philistines were afraid. "A god has come into the camp," they said. "Oh no, nothing like this has ever happened before. We're doomed. Who will deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods?" Yes, the Israelites had the ark, but there's no record that they were commanded to enter into a battle. And in the meantime, the Philistines decided if they did not return and defeat the Israelites, they might end up being slaves, subject to the Hebrews. That story's in 4 verses 10 to 11. So the Philistines fought, and the Israelites were defeated, and every man fled to his tent. The slaughter was very great. Israel lost 30,000 foot soldiers, and the ark of God was captured. And Eli's 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, died. Now we're starting to see an application that applies even to us today. When God gives commands, they're not suggestions. And the more he opens up our understanding, the more responsibility we have to listen and obey. And it certainly calls to mind Genesis 12:3. Let me quote from that, where God says this, "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you." So when this nation of Israel is respected, and we as a nation support the people of God, the United States of America has enjoyed the riches of the land and prosperity without any wars. We had peace. When our leaders turned against Israel, we suffered attacks, major floods, hurricanes, crop losses, and economic disasters. So in our private lives, when we do things to break God's law of love or damage our bodies declared as temples or grieve the Holy Spirit, we too will suffer loss, illness, and yes, even death. But now back to the continuing saga of the ark, which has now been taken by the Philistines back to their camp. And a runner from the Israelite camp returned to Shiloh with the devastating news that the battle was lost, and Eli's 2 sons were killed. And even worse, they said, the ark was captured. Verse 18. When the runner mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backward off his chair by the side of the gate. His neck was broken, and he died, for he was an old man, and he was heavy. He had led Israel 40 years. Interesting, it was the mention of the ark rather than the death of his sons that shocked Eli, the high priest at Shiloh, and that resulted in his death. But there were more consequences, because Eli's daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was near to delivering a son, and she heard of the deaths of her husband and Eli, and again the capture of the ark. And so she went into labor, and she died in giving birth. These were her dying words: "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured." Meanwhile, the Philistines carried the ark back to Ashdod and placed them in the temple of the fish god Dagon. When the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, there was Dagon fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. And they took Dagon and put him back in his place. And the next morning, the idol was again lying face down with his head and hand broken off. And in a panic, the rulers of the Philistines ordered the ark moved to the city of Gath. But again, the Lord's hand was against that city as well. And he afflicted the people, young and old, with an outbreak of tumors, or, as scholars have interpreted, hemorrhoids. And so they sent the ark first to Ekron, and the people cried out, "They have brought the ark of God around to us to kill us and our people." And so they called together all the rulers of the Philistines and said, "Send the ark of the God of Israel away. Let it go back to its own place, or it will kill us and our people." For death had filled the city with panic, and God's hand was very heavy on it. Those who did not die were afflicted with tumors, and the outcry of the city went up to heaven. By this time the ark had been in the Philistine territory for 7 months, and the priests were summoned to tell the rulers how they should return it to its rightful place with Israel. And they answered, "If you return the ark of the God of Israel, don't send it back to him without a gift. By all means, send a guilt offering to it." And this is the gift that they sent, verses 4 to 6. Rats and hemorrhoids. 5 gold tumors or hemorrhoids and 5 gold rats, according to the number of the Philistine rulers, because the same plague has struck both you and your rulers. Make models of the tumors and the rats that are destroying the country, and give glory to Israel's God. And so a new cart was built, 2 cows yoked to it, and the ark and a chest with the gold objects were sent on its way to Beth Shemesh. Here were Hebrews, and they were harvesting wheat, and they saw the cart, and they rejoiced. They chopped up the wood from the cart, and they placed it on a large rock. And then the cows became a burnt sacrifice. And the Levites took the ark and the chest of guilt offerings, and the 5 rulers of Philistines witnessed that from far off. So then all was well again. Not quite. God struck down 70 of the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, these were Israelites, because they had opened and looked into the ark. And the people of Beth Shemesh asked, "Who can stand in the presence of the Lord, this holy God? To whom will the ark go up from?" And then they sent messengers to the people of Kiriath Jearim, saying, "The Philistines have returned the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it up to your town." Verses 1 to 2 in Samuel 7. And so the men of Kiriath Jearim came and took up the ark of the Lord. And they brought it to Abinadab's house on the hill, and consecrated Eleazar his son to guard the ark of the Lord. The ark remained at Kiriath Jearim a long time, 20 years in all. There is much more to the incredible story of the Ark of the Covenant. King David dancing in the street as the ark was brought into his city. Solomon placing the ark in the temple he built after his father David's death. And the death of the man who touched the ark when he thought it was about to fall from the priest carrying it. But for now, we ask, whatever became of the ark, Indiana Jones aside? You see, God never really intends for us to find it, lest it become an idol of itself. He knew there would be religions that reputed pieces of the apostles' bones and the cross, and even the miraculous crown of thorns would become sacred items to be venerated. And there are 2 scriptures that may give us a clue to what became of the ark, however. Back in Jeremiah 3, verses 14 to 16, it says this, "Return, faithless people, declared the Lord, for I am your husband. I chose you, 1 from a town and 2 from a clan, and bring you to Zion. Then I will give you shepherds after my own heart, who will lead you with knowledge and understanding." In those days, when your numbers have increased greatly in the land, declares the Lord, people will no longer say, the ark of the covenant of the Lord. It will never enter their minds or be remembered. It will not be missed, nor will another be made. Not missed, not remembered, and never another to be made. Well, that's pretty final, it would appear. And yet, so many claims of finding the lost ark are made year after year. But we ask, what really did happen to the one that was made? And perhaps that's revealed by the Apostle John in a book by that very name, Revelation 11, verse 19. Then God's temple in heaven was opened, and within his temple was seen the ark of his covenant. And there came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and a severe hailstorm. So we ask, will we get to see this when we get to heaven? Probably not, for its purpose for the Jews will have been served. And when all things are made new, then the memory of the old will pass away. So what have we learned? Well, the ark was of the old covenant, a part of the schoolmaster process of leading the Israelites to Jesus. It was built of earthly materials, while the church's faith is built on the Spirit of God. Obedience to the great commandment of love is the foundation of the faithful believer's life. Nevertheless, the example of the ark and its purpose remains and is clear. Read the Holy Bible and always ask yourself, what would Jesus do? Remember this, for more constitutional, conservative, and Christian news and commentary, pick up your copy of the Heartland Herald newspaper at your favorite Central Florida business or restaurant. And better still, subscribe and receive your own copy every month in the mail. Subscriptions and bulk copies are available by contacting the main office at ourheartlandherald@gmail.com. Well, as always, as we say in closing, don't miss any of these messages. And search this site for more studies on salvation, Christian living, the tribulation, truth about hell, and many other valuable programs. And remember to listen to our podcast at thru-the-gatheringstorm.TV. Above all, let not your heart be troubled as the speakers and staff of Thru the Gathering Storm continue to bring the truth of the living word to a dying world searching for answers. I'm Chaplain R.T. Byron, praying to the Lord Jesus Christ that you will enjoy a blessed life now and enter eternal life in his kingdom.